On behalf of Christian Brothers Conference, it is my distinct privilege to host today's presentation, Spiritual Care for a Busy Educator, and to introduce our speakers, Brother Matthew Chiantella, FSC, and Brother J.D. Macciocci, FSC. Brother Matthew hails from New Orleans, Louisiana, and before joining the brothers, spent his first years teaching at De La Salle High, and then would serve at St. Mary's College High School throughout his aspirancy and postulancy in Berkeley, California. As he continues his discernment, Matt will tell you it's the brothers' practice of their continual reminder that we're in the holy presence of God that he finds most attractive about the vocation. His current role as Director of Student Life at San Miguel High School in Tucson creates many opportunities to invite young people to this call of his holy presence daily. Brother J.D., he met the Christian Brothers as a student at Central Catholic High School in Pittsburgh, and then continued to hear the call to his vocation in his years after graduation. During his initial formation years, Brother served at LaSalle College High School outside of Philadelphia, and now serves as a business teacher at LaSalle Academy, Providence, Rhode Island. We're grateful to both the brothers for their immeasurable service beyond their ministries in so many ways, including tonight's webinar. So without further delay, I turn this webinar over to our brothers, Matthew and JD.
Well, it's good to be here, to be with you as we have this time to share our experiences as brothers, as educators. This is, I think, a very pertinent topic, especially for today, in which we do multiple roles. All of us have multiple roles in our schools, some formal and some informal.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very important that as brothers, but also as educators, we maintain our spirituality infused throughout our work as educators. So a little bit about us. I know Phil very kindly talked a little bit about our background, but I am the Director of Student Life and Campus Ministry at San Miguel High School in Tucson, Arizona, which as I said earlier, has a dual role and dual hat, seeing care both on the activity side as well as kind of the spiritual and pastoral side of the student. So it's a great opportunity to see students in both lights.
And I'm Brother JD. I teach all the business electives at LaSalle Academy in Providence, Rhode Island. In the past, I have taught religion and introduction to information science and technology. So I'm very grateful to be with you all today.
So we wanted to begin by looking at an extended metaphor, seeing spirituality with an image. And the image that we end up choosing and landing on is one of a map. If you notice that the map is one that was done in earlier times, and so the first thing we look at it and say it's inaccurate. But we realize that when people make maps, what are they doing? They're exploring, they're detailing their reality, both seen and unseen.
Mhm.
And so as we move forward, we see that as we become more aware of our spiritual practices, of our care, our map gets more detailed. Our map gets more in tune and in focus with our current realities. So we wanted to share with you some assumptions. We all come with assumptions, especially when we hear certain words. And spiritual is no stranger to certain assumptions. So we would like you to share your response when you hear the word spiritual. What words or images come to mind? Either a word, an image, a practice. What are some ideas that that word generates? And we ask you to share that in the chat.
Okay, seeing some responses already coming in for your question. When you hear spiritual, what words or images come to mind? Interior, from Rebecca Galucki. From Joanna Case, I see spiritual as a connection to a higher power. Bill Murray, faculties related to the soul.
Absolutely.
You can see one of the threads that, as people are sharing some ideas, words, or images, is connection,
Mhm.
relationship, understanding the thread that weaves both yourself as an individual to a larger power, a larger connection.
Additionally, the word interior, right? It brings to mind that this is a bit of a personal reflection as well, right? It's something that we ourselves have ownership of and control of. And it is something that is important to each of us and can take on a variety of shapes and sizes and meanings based on the individual.
So just as we have assumptions about what certain words mean, there's also certain myths that come with especially spirituality and spiritual care. Um, as educators, we are always well aware of the adding one more thing
Mhm.
to our already busy workload. And so, one of the important myths to bust, at least in this webinar, is spirituality and spiritual practice is just adding one more thing, one
Mhm.
more practice, one more item to my already busy routine. Some of us coach, teach multiple classes, do other roles, as I said, either informally or formally. And so spirituality is not necessarily something that to just add on to. It instead is a way of being. As JD said, it's an
Mhm.
interior search for how one connects to God and a larger purpose. It's a
Mhm.
transcendent and encompassing reality as opposed to just being purely a practice.
Mhm. Additionally, the assumption is, or the myth is, that it requires some kind of expertise, that you have to be well read and well schooled, and maybe that others are good at it because of their background, but not me. And that's really not the case with this. It takes some time, it takes some practice, but it's something that anybody can really begin to hone and begin to get comfortable with.
And the danger with the it requires expertise, and as JD said, it does not have a way of doing it. I cannot do it because someone else is better. It has a comparison element too.
Hmm.
We don't want to compare. We do not want to see and hear what other people do. They can provide us with guideposts. They can provide us with wisdom, but the comparison can lead us down a different way. So making sure that we all are able to do it. So our goals for this webinar: understanding the role of spirituality. What role does it have? And having an honest conversation with ourselves of, does it have a role in our lives, both as an individual and as a teacher and educator? How much does it play in our lives? That's one of the goals.
And additionally, how is what is distinctive rather about our Lasallian heritage, our Lasallian background and traditions? How has that shaped our view of spirituality?
And the final goal that we have for this webinar is ways in which we can encounter ourselves, ways in which we can encounter others, and
Mhm.
ways which we can encounter God. So through understanding, through practice, through prayer, how do we grow in our spirituality, make our connections, and integrate ourselves both as an educator? And so we chose this quote. I think this quote by John Baptist de La Salle is an especially rich quote because it comes with some very important words that we can unpack. So, one of them, as he says, prepare a path for God so that he may enter your heart. There are a number of words there. The first one I see is prepare. As we were just talking, prepare is important. We have to work at it as well. It can't just sit with belief. Instead, we have to provide practice for ourselves. Another one that I see here is a path, right? How does God accompany us, guide us, and move us as we journey in our lives, both as professional educators as well as individuals?
Mhm.
And then the last one I think that is most important is heart. Where heart comes in our lives, where our decisions are made, where our integration is made whole. So this quote by De La Salle is just a rich way of looking at how he wants us as Lasallians to view spirituality as well. And to reiterate the importance of heart in spirituality, De La Salle was not necessarily shy on talking about the importance of heart, especially in the French school. But another more modern writer, Henry Nouwen,
Mhm.
wrote a book, short book, a great book if you ever want to look at spirituality in more depth, by The Way of the Heart. And he says the prayer of the heart is a prayer that directs itself to God from the center of the person and thus affects the whole of our humanness, right? Spirituality is an encompassing way of being that connects our interior selves with the transcendent. And where does that locus be? It is in the heart. And as you know, we have our Lasallian uh, phrase, live Jesus in our hearts. It's a very intentional way of where our decisions are made. So De La Salle gave us also a number of spiritual practices for the brothers and spirit and educators. And so we have a rich heritage that we can draw from when looking at our own spirituality.
And a lot of these ends up coming and are shaped into our modern day, right? This idea of life experiences through an eyes of faith, something the founder instilled in his early brothers and shares with us today. That we should look at our surroundings, our encounters, our relationships, really through an eye, through the eyes of faith.
One of our other Lasallian signposts, if you will, is the abiding presence of God. As you know, let us remember is something that is said by Lasallians all around the world. And so it recalls to us how God is present now and always. The presence of God. And De La Salle reiterated that for the brothers and reiterated that for educators for how we can always maintain that understanding of God's presence because it changes the way we are because of recalling that guiding presence of God.
And lastly, our participation in the salvation of others, right? In the time of De La Salle, he stressed to his early brothers that the work that they were doing was to save souls. And it took on a variety of roles and characteristics and places, but he also compared them to ambassadors, ambassadors of Christ, ministers of God, um, guardian angels over the students entrusted to their care, to save them from anything that might deter them, and to call them good shepherds, right? To call those early brothers good shepherds over the souls of the students entrusted to their care. And it's something that still resonates with us today. And if anything, might have more paramount meaning in recent years because of what's been transforming and happening in our society as a whole.
Yeah, the images that De La Salle uses for the early brothers, I think, are very applicable even today. I
Mhm.
mean, when he wrote those imagery and images for the brothers, they were somewhat of a unique way of relational of teaching, of being a teacher
Mhm.
in 16th century France. So it was a unique way of how a teacher, how a brother should relate to their students and to each other.
Mhm.
And so looking at ambassadors, angels, good shepherds, even apostles, he goes so far as to as say, call them apostles as well,
Mhm.
to share in that ministry. And so the participation for the salvation of others is something that's part of our heritage too. And we should not ignore, but instead embrace and allow it to enrich us. So going back to our map imagery, now that we've had a little bit of context, hopefully it allows us to have a more detailed map, have a richer map from which we can kind of start to understand spirituality in a more nuanced way, and understand our given and current realities as teachers. It gives us a way of being and processing, both for looking at our Lasallian heritage as also the other ways in which we've myth busted some common misconceptions of spirituality. So we will begin with our extended metaphor as we showed you the map as a metaphor for our spirituality journey. We're going to be looking at an extended metaphor of guiding and the path that God has us on. And so looking at planning our trip as spiritual educators, the first thing that I think it's important for us to do, both as spiritual practitioners, all of us are spiritual practitioners, and also as educators, is finding your North Star. What is your why? What is the reason why you stay committed as a teacher? What is one of the reasons why you stay committed as a spiritual person? What are those commitments that you point to and guide you? And how God guides us in our journey.
And what does God call us to be? Who does God call us to be? And sometimes that may change depending on the position we are as teacher, the position we are in life, the situation in which we find ourselves. Um, I'm reminded of how De La Salle reminds his early brothers that you're supposed to have the firmness of a father and the tenderness of a mother, right? And at sometimes and some days we are called to be those two same people, those two same relationships in the same classroom. Uh, and we're also called to be always discerning. This goes back to this idea of having eyes of faith, looking around us and seeing what it is that we are called to do. What skills do we have? What can we offer? And where is God calling us to grow in deeper relationship with Him? Maybe through others, whether it be students or colleagues or brothers or members of your community or family.
And this is where that all the abiding presence of God comes into effect in a very real way, a very tangible way of seeing God's presence in others, and how is that helping us in our discernment. And so, as we look at discerning, as we look at how God calls to us in our everyday reality, we realize that we're on a certain path. And the path is something that we both participate in and are influenced by.
Mm.
And so to share a personal story, how do I feel called as a brother? How do I feel called as a teacher? And that moves me in a certain direction of a way I want to be and answer that call, but also aware of the realities in which I'm in, right? You have a certain path that you go on. It's directional. There's certain roadblocks. There's certain distractions. There's certain ways in which the path can be tougher. And also realizing that when we're on a certain path, that means we're not on a other path too. And so do we go off that path? And have that honest conversation with ourselves to be authentic and to realize, what path am I following?
And to bring that conversation up in prayer, right? That so much is an important piece of our life, bringing those paths, those discussions, those realities, and sometimes those complexities up in prayer.
Which leads us to our compass, as Brother JD just said about prayer. What do we need to do to reorient ourselves to our why, to our initial commitment? What brings us joy? Right?
Mhm.
Our spirituality brings us joy. It connects us to the love of God. It connects us to the joy that God gives us. So when we find ourselves either very much on a given path or maybe off, what do we need to do to reorient ourselves to our initial commitments, our initial love, our initial joy. That is both a personal conversation as well as Brother JD said, a conversation with God, a dialogue with him, so that way we can see where we are and have light shed on that.
And this makes me think of, again, part of our heritage, how De La Salle would invite all the brothers to gather together for retreat, right? To kind of reorient themselves, to take stock of what has happened and where they're going and what's being asked of them, right? And so it's so much of part of our history, and it maintains to be a part of the brothers' lives each year as we are asked and called to go on retreat and to reevaluate what it is we're doing.
And I'm thinking of a very recent example. Over last week, we had our Epiphany prayer service on Monday. And so on Sunday, I was moving chairs and reorganizing chairs in the gym for our prayer service. And I kind of said to myself, as I'm moving 300 chairs, oh, what does this have to do? And I remembered I started kind of complaining. And I let myself have a moment and I said, but it creates an environment and a spiritual experience for our students and staff and school community.
Mhm,
So the simple act of moving a chair, yes, in itself is not necessarily relevant, but ultimately, how did I reorient myself? Those chairs create community, create experience, create bonds. So always the compass can sometimes be your own way of kind of recalibrating, reframing,
mhm.
seeing everything as we've said in De La Salle's view in light of faith. And so now that we know our North Star, we got our compass, we need a pack. And I'm not actually very good at packing. I usually pack the day before and then forget something later. But looking at packing, right? What are those things in which we need, right? Who do we need in our lives? The things that we need in our lives, the practices that are in our lives to help us on this spiritual journey, right? How do we view people as gift in our lives? How do we view life as a gift? How do we view these things as gift, freely given and freely received?
Mhm. And really, to take it a step further, how do we view these people as an experience of God, right? How do we view their relationship as an experience of the divine? And so we find ourselves asking, as we would pack with anything, right? What are the things that are taking up room that we don't need, right? What are the things that maybe are we already have, or that lead us to feeling empty or disconnected, right? Whether removing us from those around us or getting in the way of our relationship with God.
And I think this is looking at especially the things that are taking up room. I think this is one of the dangers of being a very busy educator,
Mhm.
of being a very busy teacher. Going back to that myth buster, it's easy to see it as one more thing. Or it's very easy to agree to do things because you're a teacher and you don't want to say no. You don't want to disappoint. So looking at those things that we say yes to, how does that take up room? As Brother JD said, how does that take up room and leave us feeling empty?
Mhm.
Do they bring us joy? And it doesn't necessarily mean to empty your backpack, but it means to have an honest evaluation and say, maybe I don't need to do that. Or
Mhm.
maybe that my perspective on this needs a realignment.
Mhm. Absolutely.
So I'd like you, we're gonna do one more interactive chat. What are some practices? This may take a little bit of brain power. As teachers, we're always giving homework or assignments. What are some practices that you see as a teacher or educator that you do that can be somewhat draining on your life? And one step further, what could be possibly one solution, one way to empty that out of your spiritual backpack?
And just to clarify, these are practices that end up separating us, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's been wonderful being with you, brothers, and listening and starting to reflect on my own life as an educator, if you will, and I'm thinking about things maybe disconnect me. It's the busyness of the day and jumping from they say multitasking. There's no such thing as
Hmm.
multitasking. You never take the moment to engage necessarily in the task that you're in and give it your all. Isn't that what God calls us to be fully engaged in what we're doing so that we can, help the mission along or so I think that's something that maybe I need to be better about to help me both be a better, worker, if you will, but also be a better steward um, for the mission, if you will. A comment that just came in: getting lost in the weeds of my assignments. I kind of tunnel vision that really steals me away from the present moment. So thank you, Becca, for that. Tammy
Absolutely.
Williamson. It's hard to be pulled in many directions at the same time, taking a deep breath and humbly asking for help.
Mhm.
Yes, especially Rebecca's comment strikes a memory for me, not necessarily a memory, but a reality.
Mhm.
My office door is always open, and as I'm working on, the next great American workshop, I always have either students or teachers coming in and talking with me. And in some ways, at first, I can be say, "Ah, not now, right? I'm working
Mhm.
on this. Can't they see I'm working on this?" But one of the sisters that was here, she served as a librarian at San Miguel, said something really, really important, which I appreciate. And it's allowed me to kind of reframe how we interact with people when we get lost in the weeds. She said she has a ministry of distractions. And what she meant by that is when someone comes to her, no matter what she's working on, she does her best to pay attention to the person who's in front of her. And so it's a great reminder for me because I get lost in the weeds, but at the same time, how to realize that the person in front of me is the most important person at the time. And as Brother JD was saying, how are they God's presence to me in this moment? It's a great reframing, and I appreciate her sharing that with me, the ministry of distraction.
And it's funny, Becca's comment made me think of an experience today in school. Similarly, I was sitting down grading papers, and a student walked in and said, "Brother, can I ask you a question for our upcoming Model UN position?" Nothing I have any remote idea about, but it was because I taught business. It was, well, you should know this. And it was just an opportunity to sit and chat once I finally put my papers aside, right? To be able to connect to a student that I don't teach, right? And maybe just to offer what little insight I could on the particular subject. You know?
Bill Murray offers getting too attached to here and the now,
Mhm.
the work at hand, working as if everything depends on me rather than God.
Absolutely, Bill. Especially for many of us, either just beginning or just ending the period of semester exams, right? Where we're so consumed about what's going on in front of us, the exams, the grades, the prep, the review, that we begin to lose sight of what the larger reason, the larger connection, the larger thing is, whether it be academics or relations with the students and so on. Thank you.
And De La Salle leaves us a very important quote for that. When I saw that sharing, I thought of his thing of "Lord, the work is yours.
Mhm.
We are part of it, but it's his work."
Absolutely.
So thank you everyone for sharing and seeing kind of what are those practices that can consume us and take away our time, our energy, and our spirit.
Mhm.
So how do we, now that we have a little bit of room, hopefully we can instead remove those elements that take away and instead put things that uh, nourish us, that feed us. And
Mhm.
so uh, what you have on the screen is a list of practices that young people shared with Springtide Research. And if those are not familiar with Springtide Research, this is a research institute that polls both qualitative and quantitative data of young people, 12 through
Mhm.
25, what their experiences are, and more importantly, what their religious practice and spiritual practices are as well. And so it's a great way to see our students that we're called to serve, what they are thinking and they are feeling and they're believing. And so they shared a few different practices with those in their survey responses: prayer, meditation, reading, being in nature, yoga, martial arts, or other physical activities, and art. So those were the most common responses that they engage with as spiritual practices. And I feel like we could see some of those reflected in ourselves as well. One important element that when I was looking at those different spiritual practices, I was struck by the similarity of all of those practices to liturgy. I guess because being in campus ministry, designing liturgy, working in liturgy and liturgical things, I looked at those and said, all of those elements have parts in liturgy: prayer,
Absolutely.
meditation, reading. Many churches are designed or inspired by natural areas or have natural pieces incorporated into the design and the architecture,
Mhm.
physical activity, as well as art. So I looked at that and said, it's not too far off from how we design our liturgies.
No.
So looking at some of the sites and stops, and I think the most important, at least for me, is prayer and contemplation, right? Where do we stop and have time for prayer? Where on the go do we have time for prayer? So we don't necessarily need prayer always in moments of quiet. How can we constantly pray? And that's something that takes practice and takes work and takes attention. But having prayer and contemplative moments throughout the day allow us to break around, as Bill mentioned, getting too attached to the here and now, allowing us to see the transcendent, moving us beyond our details and our weeds.
And these don't have to be extended long periods of time, right? You know, over 20 minutes, a half hour, an hour. For some, 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, whether it's a break in between classes, a free period, or something like that. For myself, it's just a few minutes in the morning before the day begins, usually accompanied by a cup of coffee somewhere. But just an opportunity to sit, for me to be still and to reflect and connect and kind of prepare myself for a day. For some people, the afternoons are great times. For me, it's not. For me, a morning works better. I don't know about you, brother.
Yes, the morning works for me very well because uh, at San Miguel, we get up very, very early. The students go to work
Mhm.
early in the morning. And so having a very busy day for me allows a way for me to intentionally find time. And
Mhm.
in the mornings, in the quiet, before everyone's awake, having that time to kind of set the tone for the day, to
Absolutely.
realize that today's a gift, and how am I called to be gift uh, for others today? And how am I going to allow others to
Mhm.
be gift to me, uh, to
Mhm.
to receive their generosity, to receive their kindness? It's a great way to recenter myself. And for those that are maybe unfamiliar or looking at prayer and saying where to begin, we came up with and thought about a very simple way of prayer as were giving some examples of CPR, all right? The idea of resuscitation. How does it resuscitate us? How does it re-nourish us? How does it enliven us? How does it reconnect us? And so the first one is C, to claim your blessings. As I said, in the morning, I like to see how this new day is gift, to leave those worries and anxieties that I will face later throughout the day. But how can I see those worries and anxieties as gift, as opportunities for encounter, as opportunities for seeing God's love in action? And so the first is C, to claim your blessings, see how God works through them.
And our second is P, right? To pinpoint our victories and our losses. Maybe taking the opportunity to reflect on our actions, examine how we lived and how we've interacted. Where might have we been selfish in our time, in our gifts, in our attitudes or words? And where have we been generous? Ask for God's strength to grow and to thank God for his presence. Where were those maybe encounters for us as teachers that did not go as we planned? That where we struggled, where we felt we may have been too hard or too soft or whatever the case may be. And then where were the moments in our day that, hey, that really made a connection with that student? I was glad I was able to see so and so. It was really good to have this student in class after an extended absence. Where are those victories and losses, and how do we bring them to prayer? Sometimes I find myself bringing particular students to prayer, either because of successes or because of opportunities for growth. But I feel for me, it's an opportunity to reflect on how can I better connect, how can I better relate or be gift to that student.
And our last letter, R, renew. Right? How do we renew our commitment to our faith life, our spiritual life? And how does that commitment lead us to desire, right? The desire to grow more deeply, the desire to experience more fully. Doing the claiming and the pinpointing allows us to have a richer understanding, going back to the map. It allows us to have a more detailed view of the world in which we live and God's presence in that. So having those blessings and having those victories and those losses and naming them brings up a desire for us to continue to enrich our lives and making a specific resolution, right? What ways in which we can put that desire, we can put that view of wanting to renew ourselves. How do we concretely express it? What are those resolutions that we're going to do to change our particular attitudes, our ways of being? And so there are a number of different ways in which I and Brother JD use and nourish our spiritual lives. And since it is 2024, there are a number of different apps that are on the phones. Phones are not the enemies. They can be, right? As we
Mhm.
said, they can be distractions. But the important word is they can, and they can also be sources of nourishment and inspiration. And so there are a few different apps that we wanted to recommend, and I personally use. The first is Della Daily. It is a daily Lasallian prayer app. And so, as brothers and Lasallians, we want to highlight and share that. That is one that we use. Sponsored by the District of Australia, Pakistan, and New Zealand. And it's a great way to look at scripture and prayer from a particular Lasallian lens. And I also really enjoy that one feature of the app always has a particular ministry of that district as their daily intention. So it reminds us of our connection to the larger Lasallian world. It really puts association into perspective.
And the next, I end up using Hallow quite a bit. I know Brother Matt uses Laudate, but it's an app that has a collection, a library of a variety of prayers and reflections offered by a variety of people, theologians, priests, sisters, brothers, and others. that are scripture based, that are mass and liturgy based, and it also has just music sometimes for those of us that enjoy the quiet or the stillness and just the opportunity for reflection.
And the last one that I also use is pray as you go. Pray as you go is another great prayer app. It has music that is designed for the day. It has reflections based on the reading. It reads the scripture for the day, the gospel for the day, and puts it into perspective. And
Mhm.
so it's a great way to either start or end the day because it gives you a complete picture of prayer. It's a great resource to recenter ourselves and reorient ourselves.
And that's one that I've used in the past in the school setting too, when I have taught religion. Use that as an opportunity for students to recenter, right? To be still after, in the middle of their day, beginning of their day, wherever the class may fall. Just an opportunity to sit, to be still, to recenter.
So those are a few apps that we have shared.
Mhm.
There are numerous spiritual kind of guides and resources out there. I think we live in some ways, in an exciting age because their spiritual guides, spiritual practices are out there for us. They're in more accessible ways. It's how do we use these? How do we incorporate these into our being that makes them that much richer for our spiritual.
Mhm.
We wanted to leave with this last quote by De La Salle. As we were saying, De La Salle left us an enormous amount of writings. We're incredibly blessed as Lasallians to have a founder that wrote so much and left us so much and have a rich legacy to leave us. And so we wanted to leave you with this quote. He says, "Wherever I go, I will find you, my God." And I feel like this encapsulates, if we were to choose a phrase that encapsulates this webinar, how do we have spiritual care as a busy educator? This would be it, right? Wherever we are, wherever we go, whatever we do, we're going to find God in it. And God's going to communicate with us.
Mhm.
We are going to open it. Brother JD and I are going to open for any questions for us. Just have an open forum.
Well, so as you were finishing up and closing in with De La Salle's quote, Tammy Williamson added in the comments, this is true. It's comforting in many ways to know that wherever we may go, we're in that presence. Um, so, as brothers have invited us to go ahead and um, ask questions, we do have our Q&A section of Zoom, so please engage that and send in your questions. If you have some comments that you'd like to leave, you can do that in the chat. And while we wait for those to come in, I just want to thank you, brothers. This has given me a lot to nosh on, if you will, both spiritually, mentally. For me, I think I try to be an academic sometimes around my spirituality because I have a hard time. I struggle a little bit with it. But the academic of like the CPR as a longtime lifeguard's a really good one. I very much enjoy that and can, instead of thinking about a CPR dummy to practice on, I can practice on this dummy here and working on my spirituality. So thank you for that guide. Joanna shares, thank you. Good food for thought. A good spiritual food for thought, no question. So again, a special thanks to the brothers, Matt, JD. Can't thank you enough for sharing your valuable insights and how we as Lasallian educators of all walks, whether we're a teacher in the classroom, an administrator, social worker, youth and family services professional, whether we're new to the profession or we're a seasoned educator, that we can take even just a brief moment. Some of us, it's just that moment, maybe with a cup of coffee, in our busy ministry to become more deeply connected to our spiritual lives and be attentive to our needs for spiritual care. Thanks to all of you. Oh, hey, before we close up, Bill Murray drops in here. I recently read about the life and story of St. Benilde and he would task one of his students to stop the class every 30 minutes to remind everyone that they are in the presence of God. Not sure how practical of a practice this is, but certainly captures the necessity of prayer in the routine of work. Thank you for sharing that, Bill. No, that's fantastic.
Mhm.
That's awesome. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know if we can do that in class all the time, but I do know that many of our educators, just as a reminder to start our classes, do start with that, collecting to the presence of God. So, yeah. So, in closing, thank you for all of you Lasallians out there who have been dropping in comments, dropping in questions. Much appreciated. Thanks to all of you for joining this presentation today. It's been my pleasure to host you. Be sure to join us for our next webinar as we continue this winter series. It continues with building inclusive communities in our schools with Ms. Marianne O'Neill of Montini Catholic High in Lombard, Illinois. Mark your calendars for February 7th, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for all you do for young people, and blessings to you as you continue to serve this awesome Lasallian mission and being in the presence of God. We always conclude our time together. St. John Baptist de La Salle,
Pray
pray
for
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 us.
us.
Live Jesus in our hearts forever.
forever.